What is the most used man-made material on Earth? You guessed it, concrete. Look around, it's everywhere. Sidewalks, driveways, foundations, floors you stand on, and even entire buildings are made from concrete. So why don't we discuss it more? In each episode of Concrete Logic, we will explore one concrete-related topic with the help from industry professionals that are shaping the future of the trade. We'll talk with suppliers, contractors, architects, engineers, specialists, and even some proponents of competing materials about their views of concrete and their vision of its future. Hey, Concrete Logic podcast listeners. This week we got something a little bit different. I was on the Add 10 Concrete podcast a while back. This is a show put on by Paul Finley, Joey Bell, and Josh Hare. It's a great podcast. We talk shop about having a concrete podcast. Believe it or not, there's other concrete podcasts out there, and we talk about working for the largest concrete contractor in the nation. We talk about a few other things. They also ask me what the craziest thing I've seen on a job site, so I share that at the end. But hope you enjoy it, and like I said, give them a follow. They're a great group of guys, and they have a great podcast.
You are now listening to the Add 10 Gallons Concrete Podcast.
Wait, the answer was add 10 gallons?
Add 10 gallons.
My first thought was we got to put Actigel in it.
Yeah, great.
Truck's on the way. On the way.
Yeah, okay. I've got two observations, neither of which are really educated or well thought out. Which are like most of my observations are.
There aren't a lot of problems on a job site that can't be solved with a sack full of biscuits.
Today's episode of the Add 10 Gallons Concrete Podcast is brought to you by Actigel 208. Actigel 208 is a high-performance additive for the concrete industry that is greatly beneficial to the producer. It enables them to increase the percentage of manufactured sand by up to 100% and completely replace all the natural sand in the mix. In areas where natural sand is scarce, inconsistent, and expensive, this provides a huge benefit to any ready-mix company out there. Benefits of manufactured sand and concrete include consistent air content, improved compaction, and increased density. Now, in the past, the downside of using manufactured sands was that they were hard to pump, hard to place, and hard to finish. Well, Actigel 208 solves all those issues. By improving suspension, stability, and the quality of the cement paste in the mix, Actigel overcomes the old issues with manufactured sand and leaves them behind. Let Actigel 208 improve the quality of your mix while saving money on every yard you produce. For more information, visit us at actigel.com. That's ACTI-GEL.com.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another installment of the Add 10 Gallons Concrete Podcast. Thanks for being with us. I'm joined, as always, by Paul and Joey. Paul, what's going on, man?
Oh, doing good, brother. It's actually hot up here in Pennsylvania. Feels like Tennessee weather or something. It's in the 90s, man. It's awesome.
You'll have that. A few degrees cooler, but every bit of the humidity. So it feels about the same. Speaking of that weather down south, Joey, what's up, man? How are you?
It's, when you step outside, it's like standing in someone's mouth. That's about how the weather is.
Yes, that's hilarious.
Well, happy summer, gentlemen. It took the summer a good bit, a long time to get here, at least up in the mid-Atlantic. But sure enough, here we are complaining about how hot it was when just a month ago it wouldn't stop raining and it was about 50 degrees for 3 straight weeks. So life comes at you fast.
Summer came and hit us hard down here. It went from pleasant to I'm ready for a frost real quick.
Yeah, my buddies in Alabama were texting me, and like after Easter, it was like 100 degrees outside, and I was actually a little bit jealous because it was like 45 degrees here, dude. It was crazy. It stayed cool for so long up here. It was almost annoying, but most of June has been incredibly pleasant. 60s, 70s, but then like sprinkled in, you have days of 95. You're like, man, come on, make up your mind. Are we in the South? Are we in Sudbury, Ontario? Like, where are we right now? What are we doing here? But overall, can't complain.
Yeah, and for our listeners at home, they should know that no one hates summertime weather more than Joey Bell. If he could live in the month of October and November for the entirety of his existence, he certainly would.
Yeah, I've never ever liked summer. Growing up on the farm, worked all day, out in that heat, doing hay, cattle, just whatever, and it was miserable. While everybody else that got off for summer break during school, they were laying around at home or doing whatever, going to the river and lakes and everything else. No, wasn't none of that.
Wait, so is that what this is? It's not about like the sunshine and nice weather. It's the fact that you have PTSD from having to work hard as a child.
That and the heat. I hate the heat. I mean, I can always put clothes on is how I feel. I've never liked summertime. Anything about it. The only thing I like about summertime is air conditioning.
Well, good news is this is America and you're allowed to be wrong.
Well, one place that we will not catch Joey Bell, at least as a permanent resident in that case, is Las Vegas. And I wanted to bring this to your attention, fellas. In an episode not too long ago, we had talked about how they were putting a tunnel loop underneath the Las Vegas Convention Center. We talked about it in a previous episode where we highlighted the world of concrete. And being in Las Vegas, the one world of concrete, the first one back after the pandemic, they had it in June or July, and Joey and I went out there. And for the outdoor exhibits, we didn't spend a whole lot of time out there. We spent a lot of time indoors, but we talked about how they had an underground tunnel loop where you could get down in this tunnel, and a Tesla Model X and or Model Y or whatever would drive you from one end of the convention to the other. Took a 25-minute walk down to about a 2-minute ride, and you could get from one end to the other pretty quickly. Well, Vegas thought this was cool, and they just greenlit the approval for the Boring Company, which is a tunnel boring company owned by Elon Musk. They're going to put an entire loop in downtown Las Vegas now. The bureaucracy of this can be a little slow, but the Las Vegas City Council just unanimously approved the agreement with Elon Musk and his company, and it permits Boring to build, own, and operate the tunnels underneath the strip, which is unique because the Boring Company is funding this. They're running it without any huge oversight from the Las Vegas City Council. The money's coming through private stakeholders, and the hotels themselves within Las Vegas, they will be paying for private stops at their properties. The loop is going to be about 34 miles in total distance with at least 55 stops. Within this article that I'm reading here, Mike Jansen is the executive director of infrastructure for the city of Las Vegas. He said they're at about step 2 out of 8. There's a long way to go with a lot of work to do. But if he had to guess, they will be boring within the next calendar year to start this project. It's a 50-year non-exclusive agreement with the Boring Company to give them the right of way to operate and maintain the project. And this is also another thing that I thought was unique. So the Tesla vehicles that will be operating in this tunnel, they're not going to be self-driving completely. You're going to have drivers for the cars that are operating this tunnel system, and they are going to be employees of the Boring Company. So they're actually going to be paid by the Boring Company. This is going to be a service completely brought to the city of Las Vegas by the Boring Company. So they're going to make the loop. They're going to maintain the loop. They are also going to provide transportation within the loop. And it's all going to be, self-contained with very little, if no, interjection from the city of Las Vegas themselves. Roughly $52 million bill for the tunnel in general. But with the success of the small tunnel around the convention center comes the larger tunnel around the entire city. And now they're looking to expand to cities, most notably like Miami and even San Antonio, Texas, where there is an underground loop from the San Antonio International Airport to their downtown area that's going to have a price tag of about $300 million that is in the works. So my general takeaway from this is it's more efficient and cheaper to go underground than it is to fly, like flying cars and drones and things like that. You know, all the futuristic movies that we saw flying cars, but the reality is that's loud and expensive, and it's hard enough. You know, air traffic controllers can tell you that their job isn't easy. So imagine the general public being able to fly around 100 foot off the ground. So it's a lot easier to go underground. It seems like these projects, in my opinion, are relatively cheap. I mean, you're talking about a loop that goes from the airport to downtown San Antonio for less than $300 million. I mean, that's a lot cheaper than I thought it would be.
I thought the same thing. When you said the number for all those projects, the Las Vegas tunnel, all of them, and I was like, nah, there's no way.
No, that's I read that 2 or 3 times. Those numbers were direct quote from the article I was reading, coming straight from the company themselves within the agreement. So yeah, a lot cheaper than I thought it would be. And my final takeaway from all this is things get done quicker and better and cheaper when the private sector takes care of it, and local municipalities and federal municipalities stay the hell out of the way.
Man, this story hit all of your favorite things in the world there, didn't it? Elon Musk, technology, private industry over public industry. That's awesome.
Yep. Couldn't be happier about it. Can't wait to use it.
Is Boring the company that, or would they use one of those giant boring machines? You guys know what I'm talking about? That like sets the precast panels in behind it. I always thought that was so fascinating. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, they're actually called tunnel boring machines, TBMs, and they're massive. And the face of it, looks like a kraken. If we were to mechanically design one with all its teeth and everything. And it is cool that like as it spins, it spits out the dirt, and then behind it, you actually have options of how you want to fill in and support behind it. But yeah, there's some out there that put interlocking precast panels that are like loaded into it like a Pez dispenser on the back side of this tunnel boring machine. And as old buddy drills through, he gets to a certain segment, and it Pez dispenses a couple of these precast panels that form a complete tunnel shell to protect everybody on the inside from a cave-in.
It's always cool to see those videos too, where they break through like the surface when they're done with the tunnel. Have you ever seen one of those where they like come through the side of a hill or a mountain or whatever? It kind of looks like a I don't know, like back in the day, a cartoon like bad guy super villain with a super crazy drilling machine or whatever, and he's like just flying through the earth. That's kind of what it looks like, just breaking through there. It's much less dramatic, but it's still super cool to see. And you see like how the face that you were talking about, how it actually like digs and moves through there, and it's pretty incredible.
I like Josh's point of view about like, hey, we all thought the future was going to be flying cars, but what if the future is actually tunneling? And one of the downsides I don't think anybody really thought, and even today, you may not notice if you're just watching something on a video, but if somebody's flying around like a human-sized drone, it's like a quadcopter or even an octocopter, that joker is loud. It is so loud. I mean, just go next to a helicopter. Think about how loud a helicopter is. And now you got 8 mini helicopters or 4 mini helicopters, riding around some dude on a jetpack seat, and they're so loud. It'd be almost impossible to have thousands of those flying around. How do you control people in the sky? I'm glad I'm not the one having to design, the sky traffic roadway systems. Could you imagine having to figure that out?
Well, and on top of that, they would have to be autonomous, because I don't trust half of these people to know how to drive, let alone fly anything.
Dude, where I live here outside of Philly, nobody minds the signs here on the roadways. Like right. It says stop, and it's like, no, that says suggestion. This sign says suggest to slow down.
One of my dad's isms, and he has many of them, as I'm sure most people listening, their dad always has sayings. Well, my dad, when he came up to a stop sign, he'd always say the white line around it means it's optional.
What's crazy here though is that you can't turn right on red lights around here.
I know.
So
it's horrible.
No kidding.
nobody turns right on a red light, but also nobody obeys stop signs. They've got it completely backwards.
In regards to the Las Vegas project y'all were talking about and tunneling versus flying, I just got to thinking about it. How much more advanced in underground structure are we versus, flying things, as far as private sector? We've been digging tunnels for thousands of years and just improved and improved and improved on that technology. It's much more safer, it seems to me, like, to build tunnels on the ground and let everyday Joes drive in them than to let everyday Joes fly something through the air and risk crashing into no telling what and killing no telling who.
Yeah.
I like that this Boring Company's version doesn't let any average Joe ride in it. You're actually going to, so you've actually got a situation where it's not going to be like the tunnels over here in Maryland and DC, where good freaking luck getting through there. The Lincoln Tunnel, you have at it, brother. That's all you. I'm not going anywhere near it. So, it's not going to be like that. You're controlling the car traffic through there.
How it's going to work for this particular model, that they have a 3D model that I was looking at for the one in Vegas. They're going to have above ground, almost look like subway stations, where you go through on ground level, pay your toll or ticket or get your pass or whatever. The cars will come up on the surface. You load into the car, then they go underground, and then, like I said, there's several stops on the loop, but the stops themselves are above ground.
That's great.
The tunnel system is below ground.
Well, one of the other things about this, first thing I thought when you started saying the story was, this is going to get stopped by the monorail company. Like, this completely threatens all the investment that they've put into that, all the revenue they get out of that. It threatens that a billion times over. And one of the problems with the monorail system, as good as it is, really, I mean, if you've used it, it actually works pretty well. But one of the issues is it's only on one side of the strip, and in some cases, it's actually pretty far away. And so you've actually got to walk. If you were staying on the other side of the strip at Aria, and you needed to go to the next closest stop, and you've got to go past the Flamingo and down 2 blocks and another 4 blocks, you had to walk quite a ways to get to even get to the monorail, and then walk up the stairs and to it. So if you can instead have it go on both sides of the strip, which is what it sounds like it's going to do, it's going to make a loop, and those stops are above ground. I mean, you're winning private cars. I mean, golly, this is going to destroy that monorail. And so if I'm the guy who's depending on that revenue from that monorail and put all that money into it, you better believe I'm about to fight Elon Musk tooth and nail not to let this happen.
Yeah. So, fun fact about the Las Vegas monorail. So let me rap to you a little bit about that. So it is only 3.9 miles long. It's an automated monorail system located adjacent to the Las Vegas Strip. It connects, several casinos to the unincorporated communities of Paradise and Winchester, but it does not technically enter the city of Las Vegas.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I found that kind of interesting. But it was privately owned and operated by the Las Vegas Monorail Company, but they went bankrupt in 2020. It was then sold to the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority. The Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority is also the governing body that greenlit the underground tunnel around the Las Vegas Convention Center. So, reading between the lines here, they probably bought the monorail to save it, as it's a good tool for tourists, especially going to and from the convention center. But maybe it's not a sustainable system. Where maintenance and scheduling and staffing and things of that nature might be more expensive than what it's worth, so they might be looking for other options while they kind of prop up the monorail system now. But I guess it's a means to an end.
Incredible. Of all the businesses that went out of business in 2020 due to our government responses to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Las Vegas monorail was one of the casualties. Incredible.
Yeah. Makes sense, man. No one was buying tickets for it.
No, yeah, absolutely not. Stay away from that. So considering that, like, think about how much all the other subway systems in this country that were publicly funded, really how much they lost and would have gone bankrupt if they weren't being subsidized by Josh Hare's paycheck. So I found an interesting story about transportation in the concrete industry, but it was about like the mixer trucks themselves and how they've become these multimedia hubs. And a thought occurred to me that there is an opportunity for somebody out there to really define a new market. And how often does something come along and you have the ability to truly define a market? It doesn't happen that often, but we're in the middle of a technological revolution right now, and it's actually centered around concrete trucks. And one of the things we're seeing right now is you've got companies like Cortex who are coming in and they're installing systems on trucks that have safety cameras, they have sensors, and they have the ability for like tracking your vehicles. There's several systems out there like that. We just happen to know the guys at Cortex. You've got truck concrete monitoring systems that people are attaching to the hatches of the truck. So you've got Command Assurance and Sika Smart Hatch that are giving guys wealth of information. Then you've got the DOTs that are coming online with e-ticketing. So you got paperless ticketing and reporting over to the DOTs and to the owners of sites and different things. You've got the concrete curing people. So you got the sensors like from Geotech that are going down into the concrete, and you've got the people who are doing the smart curing of the cylinders, different things. So you've got all this technology that is coming online, but we've actually got a fundamental problem, and that is none of these systems talk to one another. And all of these systems, when you put them in, they all come with their own device, and they say, all right, well, you need a tablet on hand for the e-ticketing. Oh, you need this other camera tablet system so you can see your security cameras. Oh, you need this other tablet system so that you can read what's going on with your smart hatch. And here in a second, the drivers are going to have, be outfitted with 7 screens trying to navigate everything. What we really need someone to do is we need someone to come along, and they need to become what Apple is to computers, that some company becomes that to the concrete world. And if you can become the mobile mixing hub for concrete technology, and all of a sudden the way Apple has app developers come to them for the Worldwide Developer Conference and say, here's how you write applications to work on our operating system. We need somebody in the concrete space to do the same thing as Apple and say, all right, guys, anyone who wants to develop software to go onto this truck or into concrete plants, here's the operating system. Now, build your app around this. We'll use one tablet. It'll go in the truck. It could be a large phase. It could, in fact, if the people who are making the truck wanted to build this build the actual tablet into the dashboard, and says, all right, and they become the hardware supplier and the Apple of the concrete world. And they say, all right, guys, if you want it, here's how you need to write it. Let's build it together. And so you have one device that can handle the e-ticketing, can give you access to the cameras, can give you the data from the smart hatches and different things. And that, to me, is the next opportunity for a $1 billion idea to revolutionize the concrete world.
All these products and programs that you just talked about, did they not have, an app? Like, say you had the one tablet, in the truck for the driver, and you have like Geotech, Command, all these other companies. Could they not have an app on that same one tablet?
Yeah, some do. Not all do. And so if you have all of these systems talking to one another, especially if you're going to be mobile, like on a truck, having them all fit into the same system is where you need to be. So if you can tell every DOT that, hey, you need to write the code to your websites, to your systems into an app on this platform or that platform, then those things would probably work. But right now it's very scattered. So you're either using video. A lot of these video camera and devices are standalone. They're wired right up to that. and they're not running through a wireless signal into an app. And so if you want everything to be streamlined, you have the opportunity to not just lock it into an Apple device or lock it into an Android device. You have the ability to lock it into your own device. And maybe that is built, doesn't mean they have to create their own operating system. It could be built on an Android platform, but somebody that comes along and says, okay, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to build it on this platform. We're going to standardize this so that we can all be sure we're doing the right thing at the right time, and it becomes seamless and it becomes integrated, because right now it's incredibly fractured. It's exciting because everybody's coming up with all these ideas, but they're writing their code on this platform or that platform and nothing's talking to each other. And somebody needs to come in on the back end and say, all right, I've created the multimedia hub. It's going to be inside the truck. And that's where the future is going, is they're giving access to the drivers. They're training the drivers better than ever, telling them what to look for. People can read it on the back end at the batch house. You can read it offsite in HQ of what's going on at a plant, 30 miles away. But having it all centrally located on one system, I think, is what is really the next big thing here.
It'll be interesting to see who takes the reins there, because I'm sure wheels are in motion, or at least I hope they are. But it could literally be anybody. It could be anybody from an admix company. It could be from the truck producer themselves. It could really be anybody with enough capital to get this project off the ground. And we talk about it all the time. You go to World of Concrete now. One of the biggest halls is where they have all the tech companies, and there's new startups every other day that pop up. It seems like all it might take is one coalition or one company to come through, but it can come from any side of the industry. So it'll be really interesting to see who's actually ready to take the reins there and get the job done.
It's exciting to see all this tech. It almost seems to me like it kind of almost just popped up, or at least it just seems like it was just here recently that a couple of the big ready mix producers that we've been in contact with adopted some of these technological advances, and I'm starting to see it trickle, through the industry now. One of our customers is a big, they have a lot of those command sensors in their trucks, and we've got other prospects and people that we talk to throughout the industry, and I refer them back to the guys that already have them in the trucks, because they're all curious about them. I think all this information is doing nothing but good things for the industry, especially like we always like to give the truck drivers a hard time. These truck drivers now have all kinds of information at their disposal, and they can become better truck drivers, and they can be more familiar with the product they're delivering and take it upon themselves to ensure that the quality of that product maintains or exceed expectations.
Yeah, I mean, and I see the cost benefit ratio starting to get to a point where it's more palatable for some of these companies. And like any industry, when you have a new emerging technology, it generally starts off with low accessibility and a high cost point or price point. And then over time, the price point comes down and the availability goes up simultaneously. And then you get to the point where it can be adopted by the majority of whatever industry you're trying to serve. I think we're there now, to the point where a lot of these ready mix companies, they can't afford not to have some of this technology, because the margins in concrete aren't getting any better, to the point now where, I mean, a lot of these companies, they can't afford to reject too many loads. You can't afford that to happen. So the sensors, which are getting cheaper and more readily available and easier to use, they make a lot more sense now than they would have 5 to 10 years ago, to the point where, like I said, a lot of these guys, they can't afford not to have some of this technology on their trucks. But speaking of the history of concrete and how far we've come, this is a good segue into our guest today. We have Seth Tandett on the show, and Seth works for Baker Contracting, but he is also the host of the Concrete Logic podcast. And we'll plug the show a few times within the interview, but I wanted to take a minute and just kind of give a personal recollection of the show. It's a phenomenal show. Seth does a great job. And the most recent episode I listened to this morning, right before we recorded this, actually, is he had Paul Ramsberg of Sika on there talking about the history of concrete, part 1 of a 2-part series, where they go into concrete at its inception, when it was used throughout history, how it was used throughout history. They talk about using things, Romans using things such as pig's blood for an air entrainment, and kind of like the first concrete additive and then how it's progressed through time. It's a great listen. I can't wait for part 2. But I told you that story to basically tell you that Seth does a great job with the Concrete Logic podcast. So we had him here because, as we mentioned in the interview, high tide lifts all ships. So if we can get some of our listeners over to Seth's channel, and if we can get some of Seth's listeners over to our channel, everyone benefits. But it was a good interview, and can't wait for you guys to listen to it. So without any further ado, this is Seth Tandett with the Concrete Logic podcast. Y'all enjoy.
All right, today we got Seth Tandett joining us from Baker Construction, but more importantly, the host of Concrete Logic podcast. How are you, brother?
I'm great. I appreciate you all having me on the show. I'm excited to meet you all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I feel like I know you a little bit, at least as far as your interests go, because listen to all the episodes of your podcast. It's pretty good, man.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you and my wife have listened to them all.
Well, you got to start somewhere, man.
That's right.
And we're believers here that a rising tide lifts all boats. So you got a concrete podcast. So do we. When we get on here, talk shop. And we were just talking a minute ago about like what kind of gear you use, how you record it, all the nuts and bolts of the behind the scene. And you started to tell us like what got you into this space of doing a concrete podcast. I'd love to hear that origin story.
Yeah, so it was a couple of years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I'm a big fan of podcasts. I spend a lot of time listening to podcasts, and I was like, didn't know if there was a lot of podcasts in the construction world. So I was like, hey, it'd be cool to have my own podcast. I like talking to people anyway, so I might as well record it. So I had a friend, and he introduced me to acquaintance of mine now who's an architect, and we had a couple meetings, and he was all into it and said, hey, let's start this podcast. I'll be your first guest. I said, okay. And he's like, as soon as my schedule opens up, we'll get this thing recorded. And never got back to me. And so that was a good excuse not to start the podcast. So I had other things in my life going on that was taking up time that could probably have used for podcasts. But anyhow, and then earlier this year, I saw that same architect, and he's probably going to listen to this. I've mentioned this before on my own podcast. Earlier this year, I saw him at a networking event, and he walked up to me and he's like, hey, did you start that podcast? And I said, no, didn't start it. And he didn't say another word, just turned around and walked away. I was like, well, that was a kick in the pants. Now I got to start this podcast. So that was the little bit that I needed to get started. And so I think that's with anything. You just got to do it and figure things out as you go. And that's where I'm at today. Still figuring things out.
Yeah, it was a little similar to us. Is that the three of us have been bouncing it back and forth for like years. Like how we'd love to do a podcast because, like you said before we started recording, like we're talking shop with our friends and amongst ourselves all the time anyway. Why not record it? Because other people enjoy that same subject. We want to bring that into their homes with a podcast. And yours is a little different from ours. And that yours is like a Q&A session where you're really, really getting down into the weeds with some of this stuff. Your questions are so good. What drives you to formulate these questions? Like, what's your method there that you prepare for these podcasts?
I don't prepare.
You just come up with those questions right off the cuff? Because, I do a fantastic job of asking questions.
I honestly, I do. At the first one or two of them, I was like, yeah, this is going to be what I want to talk about. And then I never get to those points anyways, because once you all know, I've listened to your one of your podcasts this morning, actually. You get into these things and you start talking to folks, and it just opens the door to a bunch of different things. You're like, I want to ask that question as soon as I get an opportunity, and it has nothing to do with what you planned on asking. So I guess that's just the nature of what I do day to day. in business development like you all. And when you're talking to customers, I've learned over the years that it's better just to shut up and listen, and you'll hear things and you'll pick up on things, and you'll learn to ask questions that your client, your customer, whoever you're talking to will be excited to answer. And then they will just keep talking, and you'll never get an opportunity to talk. So
That 10-second spiel you just went on there, that's it, man. I mean, that is a master's class worth of being a business development person and really being a good communicator, period. When you're going to do a podcast, I love that you said you don't have all those questions prepared, that you're leading into it through whatever they're saying. We do the exact same thing here, that we send like 3 or 4 bullets. We're like, this is what we're going to attempt to cover. And wherever we go, we go.
yeah, I mean, I think for me, that's why I like doing podcasts. Why I like communicating with people is you just never know, and you never know what to expect. You see someone, and I guess you make your assumptions on that person. You make your own stereotypes, and then you start talking to someone, and you're like, "Holy cow, this is not what I was expecting."
Yeah. It's interesting that your origin story is similar to ours in the way that you started a podcast because you wanted to. I mean, essentially, neither you nor us would be doing this if we didn't find some enjoyment in it. But one thing that I enjoy about podcasts is it gives your guests a long form discussion type platform to promote whatever it is that they want to promote. And there's only so much you can do with a cool website or a print ad or a commercial or anything that is, in a super short window of time. But you can get on a podcast and be mildly entertaining and engaging while also promoting whatever it is you want to promote. And I'm starting to see a lot of people looking towards podcasts as a method of education and enlightenment, to where when Paul, Joe, or I go on a job site or a networking event or whatever, and if someone's there that listens to the podcast, that's the first thing they come up and talk to us about is the podcast and what they learned on the podcast and so on and so forth. And it's kind of taken off and grown legs. You are more in your infancy than we are. I think you're about 6 episodes in. We just breached 30. But with all that being said, have you seen that? Have you seen a difference in how people communicate with you if they've listened to the podcast? And just kind of elaborate on that and how it kind of changes the conversation within the industry.
For me, honestly, I wasn't too worried about, I guess, how many people listen to the podcast. I just wanted to do it. And selfishly, I was hoping that my kids would take an interest in it. And like, hey, Dad has a podcast. What is Dad doing at work? Because they have no clue what I do or what I've been doing for 2 decades. So that was kind of part of it, is to get younger folks, I guess, interested in what we do, but also just promote concrete. Because definitely over the last year, I would say, maybe a little less, with all the environmentally friendly things that are going on and the push against concrete, I felt like there needed to be maybe one more voice about the good that concrete provides. So that was another motivating factor to do the podcast. But as far as talking to others about it, I think it's more, like you said, I'm just getting started. So it's more people, hey, I'm going to check that out. I'm going to listen to your podcast. And so I'm at the beginning here. So just people saying they're going to listen to it is awesome. And maybe they'll pick up a thing or two, or maybe they'll be like, that's too niche for me. That's too, you're just talking about, like you said, we so far really got dialed into some of those things, some of those subjects around concrete, that maybe it might turn some people off. But I'm not looking to be Joe Rogan or anything like that. He's hundreds of millions of downloads. So
Oh, yeah.
if I get 1,000, I'd be happy.
Do you think the success of your podcast, Seth, and even Paul, Josh, I'll ask you guys this question and get your thoughts on it. Do you think the success of these podcasts and the fact that people come up to us and talk to us and ask us about what they've learned and heard on it, do you think that has something to do with the fact that people are drawn to other people that are just on a screen? If you see somebody on YouTube and you ask them something or connect with them on social media and they respond back, I mean, there's some people get a little flutter, that they're talking to somebody that's, I don't know, that's getting their 15 minutes of fame, I guess I could say. But do you think that has something to do with the success, with just normal people starting up these podcasts or these YouTube channels and they're having success just because people are drawn to them?
I think so. I mean, I used my personal email list to send out like a notification. Hey, I put this podcast out there, and people that I haven't talked to in 10 years reached out and said, oh, that's really cool. They feel like it's this thing that they think they couldn't do, or that we're in some other world that only special folks could do a podcast, but anybody could do a podcast. Just need a computer and a mic. So, but as far as folks coming up and talking about it, that's what I'm hoping. And you guys could probably speak to that better since you've been doing this a little bit longer than I have. So, what kind of engagement you're getting? I was hoping. I tried in the past to do like a monthly newsletter that I was sending to clients about concrete related things, and it was like nothing. I was kind of brainstorming what I could do to maybe engage with clients in a different fashion that maybe they would respond to versus the newsletter. Another kind of motivating factor as well to do the podcast was it's just a lot easier for me to talk and record versus typing up something smart and sending it out to clients. So,
but you said you have a day job too, working for Baker. Would love to know what your life's like over there, working for, literally one of the biggest construction companies, certainly in the United States, maybe even in the world.
Yeah, so I joined Baker a little over 3 years ago. They are making a push into the area I live in. So I live in Richmond, Virginia. And I actually talked to Baker back in, I think, 2012. I flew down to Florida and talked to the folks down there, met Dan Baker, and was immediately impressed. They said, hey, we want you to come aboard, but you need to move to Orlando. I told them, I said, I'm sorry, I'm just not interested in moving to Orlando. And they're like, okay, how about Charlotte, North Carolina? And I said, again, I appreciate the offer. I was like, but my roots are deep in Richmond, Virginia. I don't think my wife's going to pack up. And we have 4 kids. So Richmond's a big part of my family. So I said, but if y'all ever come to Virginia, it's like, give me a call. So that's what happened. A few years ago, they called me up, said, hey, we're coming your way. Are you interested? And I met with the group up in DC, and everyone just was super nice, and I couldn't say no. So that's been our effort the last few years, is get established here. So working for Baker, I've never worked with a company this big, but it doesn't feel like it's a big company at all. I think each office has kind of their own culture of what I know a little bit about Baker. So I know the culture here in the Mid-Atlantic region. I don't feel like we work for a big corporation. The only reason I know that we're a huge company is that we get a newsletter, employee newsletter, and we learn about what other regions are doing. And just this morning, I was reading about our Gulf Coast group and what they're doing. And it's hard to keep up with. I think we're like around 5,000 employees altogether. So, but the cool thing is you could, if I run across something that I've never done in my career, a type of project, a tower crane requirement or something crazy, some kind of mixed design that I've never seen before, you pick up the phone and it's just literally hundreds of years of experience a phone call away, which is really cool. So, and it could be calling up to DC, it could be calling Houston, it could be calling South Florida. You know, everyone is so willing to help. So yeah, there was a big distribution center that we were chasing a couple years back that we actually completed. We were kind of short estimating at the time, and we called Florida office, and they're just like, "Yeah, we'll help you all get that job." I mean, it's things like that. It's what they call that abundance kind of mentality. You know, there's plenty of work out there for everybody if we all help each other. So, and then when you're talking to clients, like I focus on Virginia, but you're talking to clients and they're doing things all across the country. You just kind of keep your eyes and your ears open and say, you know, if a client says, "Hey, we got a job up in Massachusetts that we need help on," then you say, "Yeah, we could probably help you with that. Just got to make a phone call." And so that's really cool too, versus in the past, I've worked for smaller companies and you're more locally focused versus national.
So as a GC hunting down these jobs, how does business development fit now? You're trying to sell yourselves to the owner that, hey, we can build this for you better than the other guy?
Yeah. So in my area, there's a whole new book of clients that we haven't never worked with before. So just getting them aware of who Baker Concrete is. So in my world, I've always known who Baker Concrete is. Ever since I start concrete, everybody knows who Baker Concrete is. But when you're talking to GCs and clients, they like, "We don't know who Baker is." It's like it's like, really? So you gotta go through all that and explain who Baker, you know, how Dan started the company and how big the company is and the resources we have. So just talking to the clients about that, but it's also establishing relationships with current clients that are working in the same area too. So that's basically what it is. And then just being available by phone. I'm constantly answering the phone. I guess that's another thing I learned is you got to pick up the phone when someone calls and be there to help them. That's brought us business in the past. Just being available, even if it's not for your like a project you're chasing or anything, just to be a resource for them if they're having issues on another project or they're looking at a project coming up. Just being available.
Yeah, that's absolutely huge.
Yeah, and then a lot of communication with vendors, talking about upcoming projects, current projects that we're working on, how the vendor and our relationship is going, making sure those are stable. So.
No, so you're right about people being able to call you and, you know, you're going to be there to help them out. Like one of our goals is to be the person that the concrete company calls when they have a question they can't solve, even if the product that we're selling doesn't help the situation. They just need someone to talk to that they feel like they can rely on. And man, that's the best feeling in the world. And I can tell you from personal experience that one of the guys that I idolize in the concrete world is Ryan Betts from Argos. You'll never find anybody say a bad word about him, and he knows concrete and cement about as well as anybody out there. And the fact that he's only like 40 years old is just crazy because he's just one of the best. And when that guy called me one day to see if I could solve a problem that he couldn't figure out, I was like, "Why are you calling me? You're the guy I call." That was the best feeling. So for you to be able to do that in the construction world, I mean, that's everything, dude.
Yeah, that's what I'm working on. When people think of concrete in Virginia, I want to be the first call. So that's the goal.
Dude, that's awesome. It's funny hearing you say that, like, you know, they didn't know who Baker was. Like that legitimately, I was over here laughing, trying not to ruin your sentence, because when Joey and I were in school and, you know, we went to Middle Tennessee State, got the concrete degree there, and Baker was like, that was the place everybody wanted to go. 06, 07, before the Great Recession hit, Baker was in there every single week at the college, taking juniors and seniors out to dinner, trying to get them to come work for him. I mean, that was the job you wanted. That was the big fish. Them, Lafarge, Tyndall. There were a couple guys that were like the big fish that were coming in there. So yeah. It's kind of funny for you to say that you're talking to people that didn't know who Baker was in the state of Virginia. That's kind of hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think back like in Ohio and uh, all the kids up there, they go to the construction management schools. I think they're aware of Baker. I hear them when they come and intern for us. They'll say Baker by the acre. So those folks know. That was actually checking Middle Tennessee out. They're building a concrete management school, right? Or built it.
Yeah, the program's existed for like 20 years, but now they're actually giving it its own building. It'll have all of its own classrooms. It'll have a greatly expanded concrete lab, stuff like that. So yeah, they broke ground on it. It's constructing now. A lot of people we know are going to have their names, etched into those walls and doors and stuff. It's pretty cool, man.
That is cool. Yeah, so people will be going to concrete management as their purpose for school versus the way I fell into concrete.
Yeah. Well, your route was normal, right? Where you're
No.
just in construction. No, your route's not normal.
Oh,
All right.
no.
What was your route?
My route was, so I went to high school in Northeast Ohio, up near Youngstown, very, very small town. I think we had 90 folks graduate in my graduating class. In my senior year, all my buddies were, applying to four-year schools, your typical path. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. I applied to go to pilot school in Arizona and Florida. I thought that was going to do. That didn't pan out. And my buddies were like, no, you gotta come down to this big school with us. It's going to be great. So I did that. I applied to the big school, went to this big school with my friends. And I lasted, I think, 18 months, maybe 2 years. And they kicked me out of school. So I started working for a landscape company. I was working under the table, which was great. It was more money I've ever had, ever. And I was sleeping on my buddy's floor in a house with 6 other guys. And I had another buddy of mine. He's like, man, I'm worried about what you're going to do. I was like, what are you talking about? I'm doing great. He's like, you're not in school. The rest of us are in school. And I said, well, I'll figure something out. And he said, no, you need to come with me to, he was interning with Turner Construction, the big construction management firm. So he took me down to the job site with him, and he introduced me to the superintendent. Superintendent was walking me around, and I just kind of looked around, and I was like, holy cow. I was like, this is cool. And it was like one of those things, like the hair on the back of your neck raises up. It's like, I think I'm supposed to be doing this. And he's like, well, there's a community college down the road. They have a construction management program. You should go talk to the guy that runs it. So that's what I did. I went and talked to him, and he said, yeah, we can get you in the program. Because I didn't know, because once you get kicked out of college, I didn't know if another college would accept you or what. So he got me in at the community college. And then that same fella got me a job with Dugan and Myers in this was in Columbus, Ohio. He got me a job as a co-op to work. So I was a field engineer during the day, and then I took the classes at night. And that was my first introduction to concrete. So I did that for a couple years. And when I finished the construction management program, the guy that was running the construction management program at that community college says, you're not done yet. We're going to send you down the street, and you're going to go to this other, it was a small 4-year school. He says, you go over there for another 18 months, and then you get another degree on top of the construction management degree. So that's what I did. So concrete kind of found me. I didn't find concrete. I had ambitions when I was at the big school. I thought I was going to be a welding engineer, and I was taking those math classes they make you take, and it wasn't for me. They made that clear quick. And then I even jumped over to, I was like, maybe I'm a landscape architect. So I jumped over to that program, and those folks were way more creative and artsy than I was. I remember turning in it was the end of the quarter. project where you had to make this model of this landscape and everything. And I thought I worked really hard on mine. And then I went and turned it in, and they had this room that we all turned in our projects into. I sat mine next to everybody else's. I was like, oh, this is embarrassing. I mean, so I knew it wasn't a landscape architect. And then eventually my bad grades caught up with me, and they asked me to leave. So, I was just saying concrete found me, and it was just something. It just clicked.
I don't think anybody's path, or there are very few people whose path is, a straight line to something. And while you were telling your story, I was thinking back on mine, when I graduated college and I started at, it was Columbia State. It was a community college here. I was there for a semester. I think a buddy and I were going to apply to be like X-ray techs or something. That was like the first thing out the door, because I could work like the next county over or something and make a half decent living. And that kind of fell through. And then I finished up at Columbia State, and I went to MTSU. And my first degree, or that I was pursuing at MTSU, was actually music business in the recording industry program at Middle Tennessee State, because I don't know, I loved like country music, and I wanted to be in the, just kind of in the industry somehow. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I spent a year and a half in that program. And I'll never forget it. I just it was a night class. It was like a Tuesday. And I was in the middle of this class, and those classes were honestly pretty tough. And they were notoriously pretty tough. And my grades were kind of down the crapper, that semester. And I remember I don't know, something, tinged in my head. And I looked around at the crowd that I was sitting in, and I was in, a t-shirt, blue jeans, and boots, and, some hill jack from Hickman County in the middle of this recording industry class. And I look around, and there's, I guess the stereotypical music, guys, that just look like they had the soundboards in the basement, and all they did was play music on the weekends. And that I was not a part of that crowd. And I went back to the fraternity house. Paul and I were fraternity brothers, Alpha Gamma Rho at Middle Tennessee State. And I knew there were other guys in the fraternity that had concrete degrees. And they talked about how great it was, and, the atmosphere and all the awesome things you could do after college, and blah, 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 blah. And I changed my major, I think, like the next day, that week, or that month. And that brought me, I ended up here, through another couple, bumps in the road and everything else throughout my career. But yeah, the people whose path is a straight line, they don't have any good stories. We all got good stories.
Sorry, I know this is Seth's interview, but I got to tell a story about Joey real quick. I'm sorry. He said he changed his major. Like you said, his grades at the big school weren't very good either. And he comes in, and we had like this review at the end of the semester where we all got criticized for how bad our grades were. And they stood up, and they're like, Joey's got a 1.3 GPA for this semester. And we're like, no, that's impossible. Like, Joey's not a dummy. We all jumped on it. We're like, bro, you got to do better. Like, what are you doing, man? You're going to fail out. Like, we're just hounding him. But we're like, you got to come here, be a part of this community. We'll help you out and everything. He goes, I'm here every night. We're like, no, that's not possible. We're here every night. I haven't seen you all semester. He goes, I'm in the study room. Okay, we have a study room? So the one guy in the fraternity who was actually using the study room, his grades were awful. Well, the next semester, he turns it over. He never visits the study room again. Gets like a 3.0 GPA, and the rest was history, man.
Yeah. Well, hopefully our podcast can expose folks to, a trade's path, so they can avoid those painful lessons. Because I feel like my college career was probably 6-7 years long. It could have been a lot shorter if I knew, hey, this was the thing for me, versus all these other things that people were telling me I needed to do or should do. But I just didn't even know that a concrete career was in the cards. Like, didn't know that was available.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I'll try to say what I want to say here without going on a huge tangent. But Paul, Joey, and I were all around the same age, and we went through school at the time where they were selling a false bill of goods, saying, "Listen here, you got to go to a 4-year college, and if you fly a desk for a living, then you'll make all this money, and that's how you become successful, right?" And the trades were fading away from every single high school, mine included. And since then there's been kind of this, I call it like a Mike Rowe renaissance, where people are looking around saying, I spent all this money to get out of school making not about half of what they said I would make before the housing bubble, of '08 and everything like that. And you have a lot of people that are changing their mind midway through college or even after they graduate, jumping from job to job, and trying to find their niche and trying to find what they like and what they're good at. And what I learned just through experience, but this podcast has helped me learn this, and I want you to elaborate on it, Seth. We've talked to anybody, but from engineers, people who even run departments, and successful businesses, and the education level is all over the map. I mean, we've spoken to doctors, and we've spoken to high school dropouts who own a very successful companies. And I think at the end of the day, nothing will replace hard work and ambition. If you can take a motivated individual and line that person up with something that they have conviction towards, then that's a unstoppable force. But I think, in my opinion, the problem is, and has been for some time now, the way high school curriculum is set up. They are not interested in finding that. They're not interested in finding what you're interested in and looking at ways to how they can make you successful in that field, whatever it may be. I feel like they have a different prerogative. So for people like you that went to school for twice as long as you should have, people who dropped out of school and spent a lot of money in debt and took huge risks to start their company, there are failures. There's plenty out there, but all the success stories have that common denominator of just unstoppable ambition.
Yeah, because you really don't have a choice. It's either you make it or you
Got
don't.
4 kids.
I say this all the time. You'd be amazed at what you can do when you have to.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think you hit it. I think high school, my kids aren't old enough for high school yet, but I'm hoping to get more involved. But the exposure that I've had to the high schools in my area, I think there's an effort to get kids exposed to what's possible in the trades. I really think the issue is the parents. I think the parents are the ones that are steering their kids to the careers. When I was a kid, I was told, be an engineer. Engineers always have jobs. That's what you need to go to school for. Never heard anyone say, hey, maybe the trades is more for you. But I mean, I did really well in high school. I mean, I loved school when I was a kid. It just, when I came to college, it came to a crashing halt. But yeah, I've done some outreach over the last, I'd say, 5 or 6 years, where I've gone places where kids from 8th grade and up, and talked to them about the possibilities that they could have in the concrete industry. And by the time they're in 8th grade, it almost seems like they have their mind made up on what they're going to do. And to me, that's got to come from the parents. The parents got to be telling them, hey, these are the successful people in the world. This is the type of job you need to be shooting for. So I don't know how you get the parents to look at the trades more. I don't know. I think parents that are in the trades are probably steering their kids away from it, because they're like, it's not easy work, right? It's hard work, but everything's got a cost benefit to it, right? So you got to look at, hey, I could go to college and go into debt for who knows how many years, or I could go into the trades and learn as I make money, which looking back, that's in my background, that would have been a smarter choice. So, but yeah, I think that's the puzzle, is to figure out how to get the parents excited about sending their kid in the direction of the trades.
Well, and that's where the concrete industry management program, like the one at MTSU, and it's spread to 5 other universities. That is selling the parents that, yeah, you're going to go work in a tough industry and you're going to have to cut your teeth when you get out and do jobs like QC and stuff like that. But you leave with a bachelor's of science out of the university and you have enough knowledge that you should be able to fit in as a manager level role. Now, you might have to earn that. Not a lot of people are coming out and just, oh, you're going to manage people even though you don't know anything for real. You come in, they put you in QC or something so you actually get some kind of experience. And a couple years after that, boom, you've got the college education to back up a little bit of real world experience, and now you're helping run a company. And I think that's an easier sell to parents than to say, hey, I'm going to put your kid on a portable plant. You're going to travel like a circus around the country, building big box warehouses, and he's not going to get any sleep. Probably going to work with a few drug addicts. And
Few.
It's rough, man.
Yeah.
But I think the concrete program is, like Paul was saying, I think that's like the happy medium. You get a 4-year degree and you go to work in a blue collar industry. I've said this all the time, and I think this all the time. I think the real purpose of secondary education, like a college or university, is just how to interact with people. I honestly remember very little about what I learned in those concrete classes. And that's not knocking the CIM program. Well, one, my memory is shot. And two, I just can't, I just don't remember, But what I did learn the most in college was how to interact with people in the industry and how to interact with people in general. It was a night and day difference, the person entering MTSU and the person exiting MTSU. And most of that was because, well, one, I think the fraternity had a big reason for that. We had to run that fraternity like a business, and that helped out a lot. And then networking with concrete professionals, whatever events that CIM was putting on, and then the education that I got in the classroom just let me know that, hey, I know what this person is talking about, and I can have a conversation with them if nothing else.
That leads me into a question I wanted to ask you. I mean, I don't know how integrated you are with the day-to-day operations of Baker, but it's a huge company, and I would imagine they're like everybody else who could use more employees than they currently have. They're integrating internships with upcoming jobs, both kids out of high school and out of college, because the labor force is a lot thinner now than it was 10, 12, 20 years ago. So maybe between changing the parents' minds and these companies going out and really promoting the benefits and possibilities within their companies, maybe we can, I say we, the entire industry, maybe can kind of take that micro renaissance that I talked about and really promote the benefits of working hard for good money with little to no debt. So I'm hopeful in that. But with that being said, I mean, do you know if Baker's doing anything specific, or how's the labor situation at Baker right now?
I mean, it's the same as everybody else. It's a challenge to get folks. So I think it's going to be a mix of recruiting folks to join, but also a mix of, upcoming technologies that reduces the labor requirement. I think that's going to be a big push as well, doing things a little bit different than what we've done before in the past when labor was not an issue. So that's another reason why I've been doing the podcast too, is just trying to figure out other technologies that are out there, be it 3D printing, if that's a solution, which I'm not convinced that's a solution yet. There's guys out there with like the Sky Screed, Samaro's out there with the Sky Screed. That's pretty cool. They can reduce the amount of place and finishers that you need. So I think it's going to have to be a combination of that. That's one thing I learned at Baker. The same problems that I've experienced in the past working for smaller companies, they're just at a bigger scale. It's just a bigger scale of it.
Right.
And someone warned me of that
Right.
before I joined Baker. I said, is there a silver bullet there? And they're like, no, it's just bigger.
Yeah. Well, you got some resources
Yeah,
sometimes too. That'll help.
like I
Yeah.
said, 5,000 folks. You got a lot of resources, and I think 13 or so different offices across the country. So there's plenty of resources, and we pull from different offices, and vice versa. They borrow our folks, we borrow their folks.
Well, I think going back, to, I don't know when we brought it up about everybody having podcasts and so many people having YouTube and stuff like that now. That's got to be beneficial for the industry. There's so much information at our fingertips now versus 20 something years ago. Then that the iPad generation, they may fool us. There may be enough information that our podcast, Seth's podcast, Mike Rowe, with all of his reach, and whoever else out there that's preaching the good word about construction and blue collar work. Maybe the iPad generation will fool us, and a good percentage of those people, because of all this information that's out there, maybe they will pick up the mantle and go to work and not fly a desk for a living.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said, Joey. Well, and getting the message out there and using podcasts to do so is, I think it's certainly important. And it's a really exciting medium because, like I said earlier, you start a podcast because you want to. So everyone that has a podcast that you're listening to, they're really excited, energetic, and they really want to get out there and promote what it is that has made them successful, or what it is that they're surrounded by every day. And with that being said, I mean, I know you're only 6 episodes into it here, Seth, but do you have a favorite episode, or maybe an instance where you were in a conversation with someone and they just gave you like a mind blowing epiphany moment? Do you have a highlight yet of your podcasting career?
I mean, I guess, picking out of 6. I mean, I appreciate everybody coming on my podcast. That's what I tell them is, hey, I'm just a guy starting a podcast. I can't believe you want to spend an hour of your day with me and talk. But I mean, just I think it was last week, Grady Lonigan and released his podcast, and just talking to somebody that I guess my own stereotype of a concrete guy, and the folks that I've worked with in the past have kind of made me think that there's only one type of concrete guy out there in the world, and Grady kind of blows that out of the water. He's a guy thinking in the future, which is awesome. So I think there's more of those type of folks out there than I believe. So that was pretty cool. The other one was Stephanie. She's a chemical engineer for Lehigh, and just is one of those folks. I usually talk to them a little bit before I start recording just to get to know them. And we talked for like an hour before we even start recording. She's just got loads and loads of info beyond what we talked about on that particular podcast. So, like I said earlier, just learning to keep my mouth shut and listening to people. Just learn about all kinds of different things beyond concrete, because we're all people and we all have our things going on. And I don't think I'm answering your question very well, Josh, but
No. You did it very well. You gave me the very political answer of everybody that comes on my podcast. It blows my mind and has amazing things to talk about, which, that's that political answer, but it's a good answer.
Well, we felt the same way.
honestly, Josh, I'm not trying to be political. I think every podcast that I've done, there's been something I've taken away from it, and it's probably the same for
Yeah.
you all. There's always something that I pull from each one of those that I'm like, I did not know that. I did not know that about that person, or know about that specific topic that we talked about. Honestly, that is my answer. So it's hard for me to pick. This was my favorite podcast. I mean, my favorite podcast is probably my first one. It got me going. So,
Yeah.
but each one has been something out of it. I've gained something out of it.
It's like children, right? You can't pick a favorite. You're not allowed to.
I do every week. We rank them every week. They know where they stand every week.
Like a depth chart.
Fantasy football. Well, we can pick out our favorite moments of every podcast, and it's the time when we ask our guests the same question we ask every guest, which is, what is the craziest thing you've seen on a job site? So, Seth, it's your turn, man. Let us know, what's the craziest thing you've ever seen on a job site?
So many things go through my head, but this one particular incident, this was before Baker, so I try to make that clear. But so I get a call on Sunday morning. This is when I was a general contractor. I was working as a GC. I got a call from a customer on Sunday morning, and I was like, "This is really odd." I missed the call, so I went to voicemail, and the voicemail said, "We arrested your superintendent. I need you to give me a call back." So I'm like, "What?" So I called this guy back, and he said, "Seth, I just want to let you know we arrested your superintendent." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" And he said, "We caught him sunbathing in the back of his truck naked at the job site." So this was at an airport, and he drove to the top level on the parking deck, parked his truck, and I guess he had a pretty crazy weekend. He was trying to sleep it off. Apparently, he was sleeping it off without his clothes on in the back of the truck.
Yeah, I knew something was involved there. Drugs, alcohol, maybe a little bit of both. Maybe a whole lot of crazy.
I was expecting him to say it was in Florida.
No, never done any work in Florida. But anyway,
that's a Florida man.
That was.
I would at least found some shade somewhere.
Yeah, that is definitely the one of the craziest things that's happened to me. I was a young project manager to get a phone call from a customer, and I was not happy at all. And then to go into work the next day and deal with all the repercussions of this.
Man, that's a good one.
So,
yeah, that was a good story.
All right, yeah. Seth, we really appreciate your time. Appreciate you being on here. We want you to plug your podcast one more time before you go.
Yeah, I really appreciate you all having me on your podcast. So if you could check out Concrete Logic, you can look it up. It's on Apple, Spotify, all those different podcast apps. And then there's a website, concretelogicpodcast.com, you can check out, or you can hit me up on LinkedIn. And that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. But again, I appreciate y'all's time too.
Awesome, man. Yep. Take it easy. We appreciate you.
Thanks, Seth. See you, man.
Yes, sir.
Good luck.
Thanks.
All right, this will do it for this installment of the Add 10 Gallons Concrete Podcast. One final thank you to Seth. Really appreciate his time being on the program. And be sure to check out Concrete Logic Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. There's more than enough room for multiple concrete podcasts, and as long as we keep making content and you guys keep downloading the content and asking for more, we'll be sure to oblige. But in the meantime, check us out on our social media pages as always, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and then be on the lookout for our next episode coming at you soon. So until then, thanks for listening along. Y'all be good.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Concrete Logic Podcast. If you like what you heard and you think others would get some kind of value out of this podcast, please share it with them. If you have any ideas or topics that you'd like us to discuss on the Concrete Logic Podcast. You can email me at seth@concretelogicpodcast.com or hit me up on LinkedIn. Pretty active there. Again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.